Welcome to the requirements class. So it's all about requirements today. So we need to understand requirements very carefully. One of the most important phase and one of the most important responsibility of a business analyst, the requirements. So if we have to create anything, first of all, we need the steps, the various steps we need to follow, right? For the final product to be there. And if you don't have this procedure followed properly, you can never have a correct product. It will always have some of the issues, and the later you realize in the project, the more it is difficult for you to get rid of the problems. So a requirement basically guides us the design of the eventual solution, and requirements are very important. Without the correct requirements, you cannot design or build the correct product. 60% of the project fail because the requirements are not taken properly, and there are a lot more projects where they suffer later on in the project, and they have to figure out the solution later on in the project because they missed something in the beginning. So let's understand requirements since it's so important. What is a requirement? Requirement is something a product must do or quality it must have. So basically, the stakeholders will tell you our product must have four features. For example, if you are making an application, they will tell you some of the features it should have, where it should have, uh, for example, it should have a home page, it should have uh, access to various links where you can just click on the link and move on to the next application. There can be some other requirements such as the the color, the design of the application, and also how many users are currently using. According to that, it will have the speed of the application. So whatever requirements are given to you, each must be fulfilled so that to meet the requirements. So we have to basically write down all of them so that it's easy for developers to understand what they need to do. And without their understanding, it is not possible to create the product we need. So there are various kind of requirements. First comes the functional requirement. Function requirement is basically if we move to the next page, for example, the home page, the link for without which things cannot work is called a functional requirement. For example, if a car has to go from place A to B, if if it has problem and cannot go from one place to another, that means the functional requirements are not met and it is not able to do what it had to do. Second comes non-functional requirements. Non-functional is it does not affect the functioning of the product, but it it is about the qualities that must set. What is the speed we want a car to reach from point A to B? What is the color of the car required? How should the how comfortable should the ride be? All this comes under non-functional requirements. We also have constraints. Constraints is the rules and regulation we need to follow. We need to understand the purpose of the project, who are the users of the project. Also keep in mind the government and company regulations to make sure we are making a product which will not affect us later on or we will not be in trouble later on. So we have to keep all these things in mind when we are taking the requirements. Well, the next thing is what makes a requirement good? This is a very important question and asked in lot of interviews. There are various things which we have written here. What makes a requirement good? It should be feasible, it should be complete, correct, understandable, it should be measurable. But there is a very nice technique to know if your requirements is good, and if you ever need to check it, you can just follow this technique, which is SMART technique. Well, SMART is used in various field while answering questions, but just to know if your requirements are good, you can just check with this technique. Well, first comes specific. Well, uh, sometimes you can write so many words, but it will be very difficult for a developer to understand what are you trying to say. So first point is specific, that you should be clear, no ambiguity. Ambiguity is basically when you have written things which have like two meanings or various meanings. It should be clear, there should be no confusion, it should be consistent and simple. There are some of the things you have to avoid. You have to avoid some, several, many, but basically very clear how many we need, how much we need, how many units are required. It should be very specific. And there are some questions you need to ask, like what, why, who, where. Answering these questions will give you better understanding, because you can ask any question to the business rather than having being confused or confusing our developers, which will bring a lot of problems later on. It's better to get a clarity in the beginning. Second is measurable. Measurable means it can be measured anytime towards, uh, for example, if for in the car example, if we are going from point A to point B, at any point of time you can know, oh, we have completed our 70% journey and only 30% is left. So it should be measured, that you can measure the progress towards the goal, and it should be quantifiable. That means it you can tell how many days it will take, how much percentage is completed. Once you know, you need to ask questions like how much time it will take, how many things we have to do, how will I know when it is completed? So you know the thing is complete. So first of all, it should be specific. Second, it should be measurable. Third thing is it should be attainable. Attainable means it should be feasible. We should not have impossible requirements. Whenever we get the requirements, we meet with our development team, which we call as JAT session, which we discussed, and we talk to them and discuss if this is possible. We have enough technical expertise to do that thing. It is within the scope of the project, and it is within the budget, and it is within the timeline. Once you have all these answers, then we can say a project is attainable, it is totally feasible to do so, and we will be able to do in this much time and this much budget. The next comes reasonable. Reasonable is basically whenever if we are spending, for example, a project is for 6 months, it will start from January and will go to June. We should know our whole project team is working on this project and it is reasonable, that it should have enough benefits and the effort is worth the requirements. We should know it is worthwhile, and we have to know the priority. If this project will help in other projects, or if do we have other projects which are more beneficial to us. So it should be reasonable. And the last comes traceability. Well, we should be able to trace the requirements through design, implementation, and testing. So requirements should have from where the project started, who is the originator, what are the assumptions, what are the justifications, what are the dependencies, and how important the project. So it should be traceable. So this SMART technique is very important technique, and you should always have this in mind. It is used in various fields, various forms, and also to answer a lot of questions. Whenever you have some, whenever you have written requirements that are specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and traceable. Well, some people also, in some places, they also find T for timely. So timely means the project should be completed within time. So these are interchangeable. Some people use traceability in the smart, in the T for T, and some people use timely. So basically, when it fulfills all these requirements, we say it is a very good requirement. So from now, you know how to write smart requirements. So let's move on to the requirement elicitation techniques. We'll be studying various techniques, how we take the requirements, what are the best ways to take the requirements, and how to make sure you haven't not missed anything. And we'll also be studying what are the best techniques for requirement elicitation. Hi friends, it's time to study the requirement elicitation. Elicitation is basically taking the requirements from the stakeholders. This process comes after the business case is written and before the documentation phase starts. It is a phase in between where we take the proper requirements. We already studied what is requirements and what is the best way to take the requirements. We will be studying the various techniques used to take these requirements and to make sure we have smart requirements. So what is the difference between requirement gathering and elicitation? We are using this term again and again. So gathering is basically if you have information at various places, you have some information at one place, you have some information here and there, just gathering them in one place is called requirement gathering. But here elicitation means asking questions, also known as probing, identifying challenges, also working on getting a solution. All these things combined is called requirement elicitation. Let's pause. Well, the first technique of requirement elicitation is document review. Very important question in the interview. What is the first elicitation technique you will use for requirement elicitation? Well, the answer is documentation review. Why documentation review is while doing document review, you are not using anyone time. You should have some knowledge before meeting the stakeholders to understand the project, and it is you can take your own time, work at your own pace, and understand the challenges and the problem faced in the previous project, and it will give you a heads up before starting the project. So, reviewing the existing documentation has user guides, it has the issue logs. That means what were the problems faced in the last project. It also includes the lessons which were learned. It has technical documentation. From here, you'll know how much technical information is required, what kind of code were written. From here, it will be helpful for developers as well. They can check the code and understand how it was written previously. This technique helps to save everyone's time, uh, but it obviously has some challenges as well, and it also helps you understand the scope of the project. So this is very important phase. So advantages is current process documentation provides you a starting point. Basically, when you go to meet the stakeholders, when you go to meet them, are not starting from scratch. You have basic understanding of what was there in the previous project, previous application, and you will have more to talk about. You will have more better understanding. There's some disadvantage too. For every elicitation technique, we'll be studying advantages and disadvantages. So the disadvantages are the existing document may be old and out of date. Maybe the application was last done 10 years ago. It will not be much useful to you because it could be out of date. The person who is studying needs domain and technical expertise to understand what are the existing requirements. If you are new in the organization, it will be very difficult for you to understand what is written in the documentation, because previously the document used to be very lengthy and has a lot of information, so it might not be possible for everyone to understand this. It could be time consuming. Since I already mentioned previously, the document used to be very lengthy in waterfall. We'll be studying these in the next classes. Uh, so it could be problematic for you to give so much time, and you might not benefit that much. Next, let's move on to the next phase. Next phase is interviewing. So we already studied documentation review. Next phase is interviewing. Interviewing. What is interviewing? Interview is basically sitting on one or with a small group and to know the requirements. If you have a less stakeholders, one, two, or maximum of three, you can interview them one by one to understand what requirements they need, or you can have a small meeting. It could be formal, informal, depending on whether it's an external project or internal project. It could be formal or informal. And since you're sitting with them, you can not just understand by their words, but also uh, by their expressions, by their gestures. You can understand if they're happy, or if they are able to explain, or they understand things properly. And you get to understand the interviewer's perspective easily. There could be various interviews. They could be personal interviews. They could be job shadowing. You can just sit with the stakeholders throughout the day and to understand the application, what they do on that application throughout the day. There could be site visits. So there are various, but personal interviews is the most commonly used one. Let's study the pros and cons of interviews. Well, the advantages are it promotes the discussion to explore the detailed information. You sit with them, you talk to them for hours to understand basically about everything regarding the application, what needs to be changed. You can also identify conflicts or any discrepancies there are in the requirements. You can ask the question right away. You can also build a relationship with the stakeholders by establishing rapport. And not, as I already mentioned, there are also non-verbal behavior. For example, they are not happy. You can just by their facial expressions or by their tone, you can tell if they're happy with the how you're taking the requirements. And also you can follow up with them time to time to make sure you have understood it correctly, and also share some documentation with them to make sure whatever you have noted down is correct. Then there are also disadvantages. Uh, First of all, you need commitment of stakeholders. Sometimes the stakeholders are really busy and they don't have enough time for you. Creation of interview questions. You need to take out some time to prepare the interview questions, and it can be time consuming. Sometimes a very big disadvantage is they have difficult describing their future needs. They will tell you what the problem is, but you have to figure out the solution and then share with them. So that's why it is called requirement elicitation. You have to ask a lot of questions to get it out of them what they actually need. One of the major disadvantages is the documentation, whichever is written, is subjected to the interpretation of the interviewer. For example, a team member from the business is there. He might have a different understanding of the application as to the actual um, actual use of the application. So your documentation will be a little different from what is actually required. Well, sometimes the transcription and analysis of the interview data can be complex and expensive. The reason why we are studying the advantages and disadvantages is because there are such question asked like what is the best requirement elicitation technique according to you and why? This is just one sample question. There could be various questions like this. So understanding what are the best requirement elicitation technique, not just for interview, this will also help you in actual job. First of all, we studied document review. Document review is accessing all the previous documents. Secondly, we studied the interviews. These are basically one-on-one interviews. These are used when the stakeholders are less. Stakeholders are less, between 1 to 3 stakeholders. Because if you have lot of stakeholders who you have to talk to and everyone has a different perspective, it will be very challenging for you to create the document to analyze it and which to finally figure out what uh, to do the transcription and analysis will be very complex if the stakeholders are more than 3. There's some questions you have to prepare before going to the interview. You have to make sure the questions are open-ended and not just yes or no questions. You have to make sure they are talking and they're explaining the application very well, so you understand it properly and the requirements can be written. There are some sample questions which can be written, such as what are the other ways you accomplish this goal? Tell me about your frustration with this process. This is basically are trying to identify the issues. What makes a good day a bad day? From here we can know what are the good things in application, what are the things which need to be fixed. So certain questions have to be prepared. You cannot just go to the interview blank. Once you have such question prepared, it will be very easy for you to get the proper requirements in the interview. Well, the next technique we use is brainstorming. Very easy and very important technique. Whenever you are doubtful or the stakeholder only gives you a problem, like what are the current challenges or the issues going on with the application, and you have to figure out a solution. Brainstorming is the best technique to be used at that time. It is used to solve problems, generate ideas, and to create consensus. So basically coming to an agreement with the entire team. What happens in the workshop? The entire project team sits together, including the project manager, the product owners, the BAs, and sometimes the developers as well, to understand the problems and how can we figure out a solution. The project team members create list of ideas, and the facilitator, who is the project manager, they go to each participant and ask them to share their ideas. They continue sharing the ideas until the ideas are exhausted and all the ideas are written down. And finally, we have to discuss what is the best way uh, or a best way to figure out the problem. For example, let me give you a problem so that we can work on a brainstorming. For example, when I was working in a bank, we have lot of branches where there were old printer used. So there were like 30 branches where there were old printers being used. So we were getting the complaints that the check printers are having issues and half of them are not working and the ones who's are working are very slow. So we sat down in the brainstorming with this problem and we worked constantly on various solutions. There were various solutions uh, which were coming in mind, but then we finally realized uh, from someone's ideas that we can have a centralized printer where we can have just one printer for check printing and it can be shared with all the branches via mail or it can be directly sent to the customers. This brainstorming technique helped us a lot in completing the project sooner. So this technique sometimes can be really helpful by providing, since a solution you can reach out to a solution and it can come in any of the team members' mind. You never know. So it is really important. So let's study the advantage and disadvantage of brainstorming. Advantage is you can generate multiple ideas quickly, involve multiple perspectives. Since I told you ideas can come to anyone's mind, so you have multiple perspectives. You can also have a solution which was totally unexpected and it can help you a lot in the project. And it promotes equal participation. The facilitator has to ask everyone questions just to promote the equal participation. Disadvantage: if the workshop is not, if the brainstorming is not done properly, ideas are not discussed or explored, and some ideas can be left undiscovered. And sometimes it could be like not clear, and it could be ambiguous whenever sometimes one person gives a solution and from there you can get distracted. It is again the responsibility of the project manager to bring everyone on the same page and to make sure you're not getting off track. Well, the next technique, very important technique, is requirement workshops. Whenever you have more stakeholders or you have a lot of requirements and the stakeholders have just some time to discuss all, what workshop means is everyone sits together, the end users. So basically there is a roundtable conference for 1 day, 2 days, it could be multiple days. We have the entire project team, including the PM, the POs, business analysts, the developers. From the business, we have our stakeholders, the end users. So everyone sits together in a room. They have workshops which go entire day, and they work to define, clarify, and complete the requirements. So everyone has a different role in this. The PM is the facilitator. The role of the BA is to take the requirements and keep taking the notes, whatever conversation is going on, and requirement of a PO and a BA are to ask more and more questions to get a more understanding of the application. Workshop could be different. They could be formal workshop, there could be business process improvement workshop, there could be agile requirement workshops. Mostly we have nowadays we have agile workshops and business improvement workshops. If there is a ongoing problem, then we have improvement workshops. If it's a new project, we have agile workshops. So what happens again in the workshops? So in a workshop, it goes from 1 to 2 days. The entire team sits in the conference and keep asking questions to the business until the requirements are completed. Why this is a very important and a very good technique? It's the fastest way to take the requirements, because within 1 to 2 days you have completed your requirement elicitation, whereas in other techniques it can take various days. And uh, since the entire team is present in the room, everyone is on the same page. Everyone is on the same page, and they understand the project. The business analysts do not have to run back and forth between developer and the stakeholder explaining them things. So since everyone is on the same page, so when someone asks you questions like what is the best requirement elicitation technique, workshop is it's one of the best work techniques, unless the stakeholders are agreeing to do that. But there could be some problems. Not all stakeholders are free at the same time. So we'll be studying the advantage and disadvantage soon. And also, like if stakeholders are having any problem and solution can be figured out. Problem and solution can be figured out at the same time, since the entire team is present. The feasibility the feasibility of application, whatever we are talking about, if it is possible or not, this can also be determined. The role of BA becomes very easy here, because one of the responsibility of a BA which we studied was to coordinate between the stakeholders and the IT team. Since everyone sits together, it becomes very easy for a BA to get everything done, and that too in a very easy manner. So let's study the advantages and disadvantages of the workshops. There are a lot of advantages of workshop. First of all, effective at getting real requirements instead of the perceived requirements. So you get all real requirements. Greater chance of obtaining consensus, because issues and questions are asked in real time. So basically, consensus is agreement. Since everyone is available at the same time, it is very easy to take the agreement from all the project team, the stakeholders, because everything is been asked in the real time. Confirmation of requirement accuracy is immediate. You can uh, check if the smart rule is being followed just at that time, and you can, if you have any questions, you can ask more questions just to make sure the requirements are accurate. Successful gathering of requirements from a large group in a short period of time. In interview, it will take a lot of days interviewing one by one, and then studying each interview, analyzing it. It could be take a long time compared to workshop, which takes a very short period of time. Documentation is complete within hours of session and provides quickly back to participant for review. A documentation is completed very quickly, and you can give the documentation back to the stakeholders to review, and you can also get their sign off within the workshop. So in 2 days you are doing a lot of work in a very less time. Well, major disadvantages are it is very difficult to get stakeholders in one room at the same time. If it is possible, this becomes a very the best technique, I would say, whereas it is very difficult to get them at the same time. Since nowadays there are a lot of global project, so there is a lot of problems regarding the times and the logistics. So it becomes complex having them at the same time. It's really difficult. Well, the success of the session depends on the facilitator, which is the project manager. Sometimes you can get off track and miss what the actual requirements is, and it's very difficult to get the time again. So it's really important to have the right facilitator, both in brainstorming and in workshop. Next is it can be expensive. Since I told you a workshop is a place booked for 1 2 days, so you have to make sure you have a room booked. It could be in hotels, so you have to pay for the meals. You have to pay for the meals, the breakfast. You might also have to arrange their stay if they are coming from far away. So it could be expensive depending on how many people are joining. Well, next comes the survey technique. So let's just take a quick review before moving ahead. So we did the document review, which is the first technique used, which we did the interview, we studied brainstorming, and we did workshops. Brainstorming is used when there is a problem and figuring out the solution. Difference in brainstorming and workshop is workshop includes a business and end users. Whereas in brainstorming, we know the problem and the project teams alone sits and find the solution. Now coming to the next technique, which is surveys. Surveys. This is the last technique. We use these five techniques. These are the most popular techniques. There could be other techniques, but these are the five techniques mostly used in an organization. Well, surveys becomes a really important technique when you have more stakeholders. For example, you have 100 stakeholders. It is not possible to interview them one by one. It will take a lot of time, and no one has that much time nowadays. Even in the workshop, it's not possible to have them 100 people in the same room at the same time and ask every one of them questions. So this technique do not work when there are more stakeholders. So at that time, the best technique we have is surveys. In surveys, you have to write write set of questionnaire you have to prepare and get the thoughts on them. And after they have completed the survey, you can review the what survey they have given and proper analysis of the data is required, which is very important and becomes the responsibility of a BA. Well, let's study the type of surveys. Type of surveys is basically type of different questions you can ask in the surveys. It could be open-ended and closed-ended. There is a difference between these two. So in open-ended, the good thing is that it gives the users the opportunity to answer in their own words. But the problem is it could be very time consuming because everyone will have the different answers and it's very difficult to interpret and then finally coming to a conclusion what are the changes required. And uh, in closed-ended questions, you can have the analysis can be done very quickly. You can just use some softwares which will give you, for example, if there was a yes and no question and there are 500 users who did the survey, a software will tell you like 400 people said yes to this question and 100 people said no to this question. So it makes it very convenient and very easy for you to understand. Oh, like the majority wants it to be as yes, and there is some people who want who say no to this question. Whereas for doing the analysis for 500 users in the open-end question, this will take you a lot of time, and it might not be worth it. Let me give you an example when the surveys are used. For example, we are uh, a restaurant wants to know what their user or what their customer like, which item they like the most, and how happy they are. They can create a survey. You would have seen on the receipt, various restaurants have a link where you can go and you can do the survey where they ask you what location did you choose, what did you order, and how was the food rated from 1 to 5, 1 being the least satisfied, 5 being like the most satisfied, and there will be lot of questions, and there will be question like give us feedback. So feedbacks are mostly open-ended questions, whereas rating between 1 to 5, these are all closed-ended questions. And this is to differentiate between various location, as one location can be having really good service compared to the other. So these techniques are mostly used by the restaurants. And so let's study the advantages and disadvantages of surveys to get a more better understanding. So advantages. First of all, the best advantage is require limited stakeholders time. You can reach geographically uh, anywhere, wherever the stakeholder can be in different countries. It is scalable to the large audience. This is really important. Survey, whenever we have a large audience, survey is the only option we have. It is very fast and inexpensive because survey can just be created on a web form and be shared for free. It has a more subjective info if it has more subjective information, such as opinions gained through interviews. It has more subjective information. Now, let's study the disadvantage. Well, the response rate is very relatively low. For example, if you send out 1,000 surveys, there will be chances only 100 people are doing the surveys. It becomes important to give them proper reminders, and also sometimes to give them something as a complimentary so that they have some motivation to do the survey. If the questions are not properly worded, it provides inaccurate information. So there will be no use of the survey if the questions are not properly prepared. This one we already discussed. Use of open-ended questions will require more analysis by the business analyst and will take a lot of time. It might not be worth it. Require uh, it the BA will require both the training and the domain experience, because it is very hard to do the analysis for the open-ended questions. Now, incentives for the response might be expensive. Since I told survey, sometimes the response rate is very less. So to increase the response rate, sometimes we have to provide incentives. For example, a restaurant might provide you some free item for the next time you visit a restaurant, just because you did the survey. So there have to be some incentives provided, and depending on how many stakeholders we are providing it to, sometimes it could be expensive. So depending on how many end users, for example, we are scaling this to 10,000 users, and all the 10,000 users are doing a survey. Even if we are spending $5 each, for example, we are giving them a gift card, the cost can go to $50,000. So sometimes it could be expensive. We have to make sure uh, we have that proper budget set before moving ahead. Well, so these are the requirement elicitation techniques we have studied. This is very important. You need to figure out which is the best technique according to you. There is no best technique depending on the size of um, the how many stakeholders are there, what are their availability. You have to determine. So just giving a quick overview again, what we studied is we studied 5 different types of techniques. First one was document review, interviews, brainstorming, workshops, and finally surveys. So once you have good understanding of this requirement elicitation technique, I'm sure you will not have any problem understanding the requirement elicitation. If you have any questions, do ask in the comments and we'll respond. Thank you so much. We'll do the requirements in the next class.